Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Mission Matters Business Podcast, your source for all things business. My name is Adam Torres. You can follow me on Instagram at AskAdamTorres. Keep up with my book releases, book tour schedule, signings, all that other good stuff. Always love to connect with you there. And as always, if you'd like to apply to become a co-author of one of my upcoming books, just head on over to the website, missionmatters.com, and click on Become an Author to apply. All right, so today I have Naomi James on the line, and she's a mental performance consultant over at Naomi James Performance Consulting. Naomi, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so excited about today's topic. So overcoming barriers for high performance. You're the woman I want to talk to about that. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit more about what you're doing as a mental performance consultant. Tell us a little bit more about your practice, please.
Yeah, sure. So like I said, like you said, I'm a mental performance consultant. And what I do is I work with high performers, athletes, musicians, basically a lot of them, in order to help them improve their performance. And I do that through the use of mental skills. So these are all based on sports psychology research, and it's the newest, kind of information and topics are coming to light. You might know things like confidence or resilience or even motivation. All of those things are used, and we use them as mental performance consultants as tools in order to help our athletes elevate their performance and be their best selves.
That's awesome. So overcoming barriers for high performance, I think that's a great transition. Where do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of key things that are really important when we talk about overcoming barriers. I can think of about two or three off the top of my head, but one of the biggest ones I think is managing setbacks and dealing with failure. I find that a lot of high performers sometimes have great relationships with failures, but others don't. And one of the biggest things that I find that's really important when overcoming barriers is to actually change the dynamic of the relationship with failure. And so that requires a lot of reframing and a lot of like a cognitive approach in terms of sports psychology. And so I think that if you can actually reframe your failures and learn to see them as potentially opportunities or challenges, it actually helps in the long run when dealing with adversity. And that's probably one of the first and foremost and one of the biggest, I think, components that I think is really important when overcoming adversity.
So when you say that, and obviously in a 15-minute podcast, where I don't want to oversimplify what you do. We're not going to be able to get to it all, obviously. And our listeners know that, by the way. But is there a tip or an exercise or just a thought process you can give to us that would teach us how we can maybe start working on reforming that or reframing that relationship with failure?
Yeah, I think the first part in what I do is really becoming more aware. So I think the first tip that I would recommend when it comes to failures is to recognize the language and sort of how you're speaking to yourself on a regular basis, right? Because not everybody takes failure in the exact same way. And without getting into a huge list of them, there's many forms of failure, but I think it depends on how you're actually taking it. You might find people who internalize it, right? Like, oh, I suck. This is the end of the world. You might also find people who are just like, oh, I shouldn't have made that mistake because maybe it's a mistake that might be common, but they're repeating it, right? So I think it really depends on not only how you kind of like see failure, but also recognizing the form of failure that you might have first and foremost. So that's that self-awareness piece. So that would be the first part, I would say, in terms of what you would do. And then as a secondary part, it's just to kind of work on reframing it. Can you see this failure, again, as something different? Can you see it as a challenge? Can you see it as an opportunity? And I love this because regardless of whatever field you're in, whether you're an athlete or whether you made a mistake at work, right, nobody really likes to fail. And that's okay, but there are so many opportunities from failure that you can learn from. And I think that's what's really important.
Yeah, it's as you say this, like it's so weird. Like over time, I feel like, especially in business, I can't speak. I was never a real athlete, so I can't speak from that end. But from like the business side, I get worried when things are going too good. I'm like, something's going to happen. This week there were no problems, nothing like, wait a minute, things are going well. I'm like, I need some failure. Like, something's got to happen because I don't trust it. So I get what you're saying.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't actually think there's anything wrong with that at all. What you're describing is sort of like an anticipatory failure. And that's actually how, some of the other people stay on top of things that they might have to look out for, or now they're trying to look for things that maybe they haven't covered, right? So you're actually being proactive in that approach. But yes, that's exactly what it might be like, right? You might be like, oh shoot, things are going too well. Now I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But again, that in itself is an opportunity. And I think that's really important to recognize. And
don't worry, I don't have that problem too often, Naomi. I mean, it just happens sometimes. Usually something's going wrong, just to be clear. That's why I'm like, so wait a minute, it's kind of weird.
No judgment. There is no judgment here. Whether it goes wrong or whether it goes right, that's okay. It's all about
Oh my gosh. So where do you find, let's talk for a moment to some of there's a lot of business owners, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of executives listening to this right now.
Yeah.
Where do you find for that segment? So when you're thinking about that entrepreneur population out there, where do you find a lot of them kind of miss the mark on kind of going down this path of performance? Like, where do you find they're normally just a little off? And again, that's generalizing. I know it's going to be different from person to person, obviously, from what level they're at. But let's talk about to the founders, just to narrow it down a little bit more. Like those founders that are just getting started, maybe they're on their first or second business.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually like my first business as well. So, I mean, I will speak from direct experience. I think sometimes we can have a little bit, I don't want to call it unrealistic, but I want to use unrealistic in the context, and just bear with me, because I think when I started this business, I was very excited at first, and I was very happy and ready to sort of jump in and be fully motivated, right? But I think at a certain point in time, when you're not necessarily experiencing the success that you thought you were going to have by, like, again, something unrealistic. Like for me, I wanted to be wildly successful in 6 months. And while I knew this was sort of like a really tall feat, it's still something that I really wanted to do. And I was a little kind of like disappointed, when I didn't actually achieve that goal or that mark in 6 months. And so I think it caused me to sort of realize that this is where a lot of people fall off, right? When at first you don't have the success that you want, and when you have these high expectations and you have these big dreams, you don't necessarily get there. It's so easy to just throw in the towel and be like, you know what? This is all I could do, and like, I'll just move on to the next business, right? Or I'll just do something else at that time. But I think it really helps me understand that there's like a part where you have to really dig in, like, and this is to do with like everything from like marketing, and like if you're a business like mine, getting more traction. Like there's always things that you can be doing and improving and learning. And so even though you might not be where you want to be initially, that doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be successful, but it's going to be a lot of hard work. And I think, not that it was unrealistic expectations, the more I'm talking about it, I just feel like it's understanding sort of like the amount of effort and like hard work and perseverance that is really required, right? When you want to start up a business. And so it's great when, maybe when you are successful and you can have a lot of moving parts to manage some of those things. But at the beginning, for you, the founders, it's mostly you, right? Starting out by yourself, even if it's just the initial idea or the initial business plan. So I just think that you got to be prepared to kind of put in that hard work and expect, kind of like I said before, to fail, right? You can't expect to have like wild success right off the bat, and you have to be okay with that and be resilient enough to bounce back and be like, you know what? I learned something from this. I'm going to take this forward into the next 6 months, into the next year, into the next 2 years, right? To really help you, like, propel you forward.
That's awesome. So Naomi, well said, well put, and love it. And I think a lot of the founders out there are going to, the ones that are just starting out and that are kind of closer to your shoes or in your age, they're going to be like, oh man, we're going through it together. The ones that have like maybe gone through a couple businesses or are further along in age and career, they're going to be like, oh, I remember when we were getting started. I was just like her. She's awesome. She's right on her way. So I love it in both cases. So that being said, Naomi, if somebody's listening to this and they want to learn more about your performance consulting services, I mean, what's the best way for them to reach out and to learn more?
Yeah, so there's pretty much two ways that I operate. The first one is by you can go on my website, www.naomijamesconsulting.com, or I do answer Instagram messages, so feel free to contact me on my business Instagram, which is Naomi James, all one word, _MPC.
Fantastic. Well, Naomi, really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing more about all the great work that you're doing over at Naomi James Performance Consulting. And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. Hope you got a lot of value out of this. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review on the Apple iTunes Store. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, Mission Matters Business, definitely give us a subscribe there, but also leave us some comments on the video. I mean, love to know what kind of projects and things that you're working on. And Naomi, thanks again for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Adam. Have a great day.